Hi everyone, it's Dr. Meg here, and tonight we are going to be talking about how you can support your microbiome with food. And I did a poll a while back, and this is one of the most highly requested topics. So I have my notes with me, we're going to go through things, and all of my lives that I've been doing for the last several months have all been really long. They've all been about an hour, and I know that's a little bit too much of a chunk of time for you guys to bite off and chew. And so what I'm going to start doing, starting tonight, is having shorter lives, doing shorter videos. So that's what we're going to do tonight. We're going to shoot for 15 minutes, and I'm just going to jump right in. So today we are going to talk about how to support your microbiome with diet. And I first am going to explain how the gut flora works, because I know a lot of you watching this probably don't necessarily know what I'm talking about when I say gut flora. And if we don't know that, then how are we going to understand today's topic? So the first thing that's really important to know is that there is about 6 pounds of beneficial bacteria in our gut. And these are bacteria that do so many different things for us. And in fact, this 6 pounds of bacteria is actually what lives in our colon. We have bacteria that is pretty much all over our mucosal surfaces, all the way from our mouth, all the way down to our anus or our butt. But the most of the bacteria that we have is in our colon. So that's important to know, is that you do have beneficial flora all over your digestive system, your GI tract, but it's mostly in your colon. The other microbiome that we should talk about one day is actually the dental microbiome. So, but today we're going to talk specifically about the intestinal microbiome, what makes up your colon. And the other cool thing to know is that we have more bacteria inside of us than we actually have cells in the human body. We have trillions and trillions of bacteria, and they actually outnumber all of our genes, all of our cells in our system. And that is bacteria that is both inside of us in our colon, and bacteria that is actually outside of us on our skin. So we live in a symbiotic relationship with this with these gut microbes, the microbiome. And we really couldn't live without our microbiome, you guys. They do so many important things for us, and we're going to talk about that. And we provide them a safe home, and they provide us with a bunch of important things, like making vitamins, making a healthy gut lining. We'll talk about that in a second. And we start to build our microbiome pretty much from the minute that we're born. So when a baby is passing through the vaginal tract of its mother, it's going to be squished and squeezed as it's coming out. And so it's actually going to inhale and ingest a lot of the vaginal flora of the woman. And that is really, really important for colonizing the babies that are born. And babies that are born C-section, they have a little bit of a disadvantage when it comes to getting colonized. They get colonized later, especially if that baby is breastfed. You get to experience the flora that's on mom's breast and mom's skin, when you're doing skin to skin, when you're sharing different body fluids, and the environment, which we build our microbiome from birth. And regardless whether we are actually born vaginally or C-section, we're throughout our lives continually being exposed to other humans through touch, through the great outdoors, dirt, and then especially all of the travels that we go through. Different countries have different types of bacteria that are considered normal, which is why you will go to a different country and sometimes get sick, because it's a different type of bacteria. And there's also a lot of different bacteria on different types of food. So one thing that we'll talk about is how you can eat to create microbial diversity, which I'll explain what that means in a second, so that you can have a healthy microbiome, because a healthy microbiome is really important for all aspects of health. But when we're talking about bacteria on food, there is bacteria that is naturally on a lot of the different foods that we eat every day. So, for example, vegetables, especially vegetables that are grown in the ground and grown outdoors, those all have different bacteria on them. And one traditional way of making a sauerkraut is actually called lactofermentation. And what you do is you take a cabbage and you chop it up into slices, and you put it in a big bowl, and you salt it to draw some of the water out, and then you mash it with the end of a spoon or a mallet, and that's to kind of encourage some breakdown of the natural fibers in the cabbage, but to also get the salt to penetrate into the cabbage. And then what you do with that cabbage is you put it into a jar, and you just leave it in a decently warm area, an area in your house that has good ventilation, isn't too cold, isn't going to be disturbed, and you let that ferment for a certain period of time depending on how you want your cabbage. And that is a way that we used to make sauerkraut for generations. And so when you're buying sauerkraut in the store, traditionally it would be that type of sauerkraut, that lacto-fermented sauerkraut, but a lot of sauerkraut these days, unless you're buying very specific brands, is going to be not made that way and not as beneficial for the flora. But the point of that example is showing you that we didn't do anything to the cabbage to get it to ferment and create some beneficial bacteria in the fermentation process. There was already microbes on the cabbage that facilitated that process. So when I say that there's different bacteria on certain foods, there's different bacteria on certain foods, and it allows us to ferment it, and it's also going to help out our microbiome when we ingest them. So that is one reason why it's really good to buy local, and it's really good to not eat processed foods, to go to the farmer's market and buy vegetables from your local area so that you're getting some of the microbiome naturally, or you're supporting your microbiome naturally from the foods that you're eating. Hi everybody that's joining. This is fun. We're talking about how to support your microbiome with diet. So I just talked about fermented cabbage. So this will be posted up, so if you miss it, you can go back. But let's talk about now what I mean by microbial diversity. This is actually a term that I just learned about a couple years ago because it was finally a term that was assigned to this idea of that we want to have lots of different types of bacteria inside of our intestines, making up our microbiome. And this is something that we as naturopathic medical doctors have known about for so long, but now the research is finally catching up. So these terms are getting created and they're getting thrown around the internet, and even traditional doctors are learning about these things. So it's actually really great. So this idea of microbial diversity is essentially this idea that all bacteria have a role in the gut, whether it is to make mucus, produce butyrate, make vitamins, or to support other bacteria. Every type of bacteria has a purpose. They don't just sit in your gut and do nothing. They have a purpose. So the idea is that we want as many bacteria in our gut as possible to thrive and do well, because the health of our microbiome directly affects how we function as a human overall. And I'll talk about that a little bit in a second. But when we're talking about the bacteria that we have in our gut, there are different bacterial families and different species of bacteria within those families. And they're all different types of bacteria that have different types of functions and tend to like to produce different things like vitamins or butyrate, or they tend to ferment different things. So they all have a job. And so if we have a person that is really low on butyrate producers or is really low on vitamin producers, then we're going to see the health of that individual suffer. So the other piece of this is that when we were talking about how we get this microbiome, the types of flora that you end up having in your own gut are really based upon your experiences as a human. So like I was saying, whether you're born vaginally or C-section, or who you have kissed or who you've had sex with, or what kind of traveling that you do, or what kind of dirt you've eaten as a child and where you've grown up, even what kind of what part of the world you've grown up in. That all shapes the different types of bacterial families and the microbial diversity that we cultivate and that we experience and that we have as an individual, that makes up our microbiome. So the types of flora that we have are really based on all those experiences. So you might be strong with your Bacteroides, you might be strong in your Lactobacillus, you might be strong in your Akkermansia. It just kind of depends on your experiences. And the other part that's really common in America and developed countries is that your microbiome can be altered decently quickly if someone is taking antibiotics or is taking any sort of drugs. Like for women, especially the birth control pill really does alter our microbiome, our normal flora. And so whenever there are changes in our normal flora, that can have detrimental effects on how we feel, on our brain health, energy levels, how we absorb and process food. And so while there are lots of different ways that we can build a healthy microbiome, there's also lots of different ways that we can alter the microbiome in a negative way. But the good news is that we can rebuild the microbiome if there ends up being a need for something like an antibiotic. So there's good news. But studies do show that humans can have certain changes in our flora over time where whole families of bacteria or whole types of bacteria can essentially be absent in the gut upon testing. And so that can cause a whole bunch of effects, negative effects on a person when you are missing whole bacterial families that are supposed to be really supportive for your gut health and keeping your entire body healthy. So let's talk about testing for a second, because I just mentioned testing, and you guys all know that I'm all about testing, because testing is a bunch of data to tell us what exactly is going on. And for those of you that are joining, hello. I'm looking down at my notes so that we stay on track, so I can get you guys out of here in 15 minutes. So let's talk about testing. You can essentially find out what kind of gut bacteria you have with doing a comprehensive stool analysis. And this is something that a naturopathic medical doctor or a functional provider can give you. You do in the safety and privacy of your own home. It's a kit that you do. No one else handles your poop except you, and you ship it directly to the lab and they analyze it. And then you get the results about 2 to 3 weeks later. So really, really great. I look at these all week. I think they're fantastic. So you can find out what kind of gut bacteria that you have in a comprehensive stool test. You can find out what kind of gut you have, whether it's a healthy gut, whether your intestines need help, whether you're inflamed, whether your gut lining is compromised. And you can figure this all out based on what they test in the stool sample that you send in, and based on your scores that they give you. So I use these often with patients. What is really cool is that the testing is getting better and better and better. And the stool tests that I was using when I first got into practice 4 or 5 years ago is totally different than what I use now. And because there's so much diversity and plasticity in the human gut in terms of what we're researching and learning and what we're seeing with patients, I expect that our gut testing is going to get better and better and better and better. But I know in 10 years, we're going to go back and look at what we were doing today and think, oh my gosh, there was so much we didn't know, which is always the case in medicine. But the coolest thing is that these tests are getting better and better and better, especially as we are using different types of testing. And the cool thing is that the results will tell me whether you have a diverse microbiome, so whether your sample is diverse, whether it has lots of different types of bacteria, but it will also tell me what kinds of pathogens are living in the gut. So these are pathogens that we don't want. These are bacteria that have maybe overgrown because perhaps you have lower amounts of good normal flora, so that's not crowding out the pathogens like it would typically, or you have low stomach acid, so some pathogens snuck through and took up shop. Also tells what kinds of good pathogens are living in there, which is really important. And it will also tell us whether your gut lining is healthy or not, or whether you're making enough short chain fatty acids. And one thing I love about stool testing is that it tells us a lot about short chain fatty acids, which I just mentioned, and I want to explain to you what that means, because I don't think a lot of people talk about short chain fatty acids, and they are really important. So a short chain fatty acid, or an SCFA, is a type of short chain fatty acid, which is something that the bacteria in your gut produce when they ferment fiber. And you have 4 different types of short chain fatty acids. The main one that you'll probably hear most of us talk about is called butyrate. And butyrate is super important. And these are all produced by your normal healthy gut bacteria when the bacteria eat and ferment fiber. And so fiber is actually really, really important to support your microbiome. And so when we talk about the foods that are really important to support your microbiome, you'll notice that they all contain some sort of fiber in them. So the reason why butyrate and short chain fatty acids in general are really, really important are because the butyrate that is produced by your healthy bacteria helps protect the gut lining. It helps prevent against food allergies. It helps prevent against leaky gut. And it just, one cool thing about it is that butyrate is actually produced by some bacteria like lactobacillus that help keep the pH of the intestines low. And when we keep the pH of the intestines low, that essentially takes away a lot of opportunity for bad pathogens and things like yeast that like a more alkaline environment versus a more acidic environment. It prevents them from growing. So having healthy amounts of certain types of intestinal bacteria like lactobacillus that make butyrate for us, which helps keep the pH of the intestines low to crowd out any of the bad guys, is actually really important. So I see some people downplay this idea of the importance of having certain types of bacteria in the gut, but it really, when we're looking at it on a very small level, when we're looking down to the details, it really does matter for overall health. So if you eat fiber that your healthy microbiome, your healthy normal flora, bacteria can produce, can ferment to produce butyrate, then they are going to help lower the pH of your intestines, and so you crowd out any of the bad pathogens. So super, super important. And the interesting thing is that people that are low in butyrate and low in short chain fatty acids, they're actually really quite sick. They are the types of people that have narrowed their diet down to 5 or 10 foods. They can't tolerate any type of food or even different medications without reacting to them. Spices, they react to a ton of foods. They have lots of chronic health issues. They have lots of chronic digestive issues. So gas, bloating, stomach pain, constipation, diarrhea, and if you are a person that has a lot of those symptoms and you're reacting to pretty much every food under the sun, I would definitely look into getting a comprehensive stool test for your microbiome to assess, hey, perhaps I'm really low in butyrate, or I'm low in the certain types of bacteria that I need to keep my microbiome healthy. So that is why I use testing. But the good news, and to kind of wrap everything up, I'm going to talk about my favorite foods for helping to support a healthy microbiome. And the good news is that even if you are a type of person that is chronically ill and has long-term gut issues, having a diverse diet that is really, really rich in different plant fibers can help rehab your gut. So I'm going to talk about that in a second. But the key, you guys, if you guys take nothing away from this video, the key is that you eat a diverse diet. And when I say a diverse diet, I mean that you are not eating the same thing every day. I mean that you are actively choosing different vegetables at the store. You are rotating different vegetables. You are trying new foods. You are preparing foods differently. You're not just eating cauliflower mash and asparagus and spinach salad every single day. You are eating bell peppers and olives and artichokes and parsley and cucumbers and everything. You're just completely always including completely new foods into the diet and rotating it. So that becomes really relevant because if you guys are creatures of habit, and I know a lot of my patients are, and I know that I can sometimes be that way, is that we like to eat the same foods all the time, but that is actually not what our microbiome needs. We need to have a really, really diverse diet. So, for the people that food prep, which is a lot of us, to help us get through the week, the best thing for you to do is to pick different vegetables and different foods every week to include. Don't always, food prep your broccoli the same way. Don't always include asparagus. Don't always include that same salad. You really have to pick different foods. So eat a bunch of different foods to support your gut bacteria. If you don't take away anything from this video, essentially the idea is that if you have a diverse diet when it comes to plants, then your microbiome is going to be way healthier in comparison to the people that don't have a diverse plant diet, plant food containing diet. Because you can take supplements like Butyrate and like probiotics and other prebiotic types of supplements. You can take those types of supplements orally, but the best way is really to make it a lifestyle and do it in your diet. So let's talk about my favorite foods to wrap this up. And if you miss this list, I'm going to post it on an Instagram post shortly after this video. And this video will be up everywhere for viewing. At Dr. Meg ND everywhere. YouTube, Instagram, all the spots. So favorite foods, here you go. You ready? So pretty much all veggies. Almost all veggies, you guys. Almost all veggies. Fermented foods, so this is things like real sauerkraut, real lacto-fermented pickles. Fermented carrots are really good if you're not really a kraut person. Some people really like pickled beets. Beets are great for digestion. They're great for helping get your poops moving. Love all types of beets, whether they're pickled or not. All types of inulin-containing foods. So these are things like banana, burdock, chicory, dandelion, artichoke, jicama. Jicama is a great food, you guys. It's very low calorie. It's very high in water. It's really great for dipping. So that can add a nice crunch to your life, especially if you are watching your calories, or you're on some sort of weight loss plan, or you like crunch. That's not a cracker if you can't have crackers. Love jicama. Things like Brussels sprouts, all of the Brassicaceae family of vegetables. Brussels sprouts, broccoli, broccolini, broccoli rabe, cabbage, cauliflower, collard greens, kale, kohlrabi, mustard greens, turnips. I really love burdock root. Burdock root is fantastic because it helps the liver, but also has a lot of different polysaccharides that are fermentable, and a lot of different fiber in it. And you can find this at the grocery store, depending on where you live. I know when I lived in Seattle for medical school, I could find this at Central Market up there. I loved that place. You can find this at Whole Foods really commonly, no matter where you live. It's really great in a stew or in a root vegetable roast, like roasted veggies. Any sort of green vegetable, so anything green and leafy, really, really amazing, and really high in folate and magnesium and minerals. So green leafies are totally your friend. Also, sweet potatoes, winter squashes, carrots. We're coming into winter, so winter squashes, sweet potatoes, turnips, they're all in season and very roastable and delicious. For those of you just joining, we are talking about my favorite microbiome supporting foods for having a healthy microbiome. Celery, parsley, cilantro, all these herbs that are great. Also, they support the liver. Things like cucumbers, beets, onions, and garlic are amazing. And they're also really high in inulin, which is very fermentable by the gut, which is fantastic. And then I also really like food fibers like chia, flax, psyllium, and acacia fiber. Those are fantastic. And then you can, if you tolerate other plant foods like whole grains and beans, you can totally include those as well. I have oats on here and black beans because those are some of the really common ones. And oats you can include lots of different ways in muffins and smoothies and oatmeal and overnight oats and cookies. So that can be a good way to get in some soluble fiber there. So another note before we go, there's some people that will do a diet change where they change their diet to, say, either a paleo or a vegan diet compared to a standard American diet, and they tend to feel really, really good for 2 weeks or a month. And some of that is because they've just increased their vegetable load and they're detoxing a ton of gross stuff. They're not eating toxins, they're not eating tons of sugar. But some of that, I feel so good after I changed my diet from non-vegetable diet to a diet that's high in vegetables, is because of a sudden influx of plant foods that are fermentable by the microbiome and help support a healthy microbiome. So that is all I have for tonight. I said that we were going to keep this as short as possible. If you missed the list of my favorite microbiome supporting foods, then I'm going to post this on Instagram after this video. And if anybody has any questions, please shout them out really quick before I go. And if not, thank you for joining, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.